Okay. Just a couple of comments. Make sure that you are respectful of others, raise your hand, and all that other stuff. So let us begin with a blessing. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kishanu Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the world,
who has
sanctified us with your commandments, commanded us to engage in the words of the Torah. And Riva, you are leading us today.
I am. Welcome, everybody. Our parsha today is Shelech Lecha Perek Bet, the meaning of wearing tzitzit or fringes, and we're on pages 42 to 44 of our good friend Harvey Field's third volume. First thing I want to do is, was there something you want to say, Steve?
No, I just want to make sure everyone can hear you fine.
Can everybody hear me? If you can,
Yes.
wonderful. I just want to bring a little bit of show and tell. I have one of these things that we're talking about called a, let me see, a petite techlet, or a talit katan. And the tzitzits are petite techlet with blue thread. And I want to see if I can get it close enough so you can see how beautifully these are knotted together.
Very nice.
And here is the entire, then get back far enough so you can see what the whole thing looks like. I don't think you can get
Very nice.
That's the underneath thing. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Some men wear it out, some wear it under their clothes, and and the tzitzits are long. So you might see them under, if people wear them showing, you see them outside people's jackets, even though it's kind of like an undershirt.
Right.
I want to just raise a couple of questions we'll consider later after we get started on the reading. According to philosopher Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, a real symbol is a visible object that represents something invisible. That is, something invisible representing something present. That sort of sounds a little confusing. The purpose of ritual objects in Judaism is not, and according to Heschel, and not everybody agrees on this, the purpose of ritual objects in Judaism is not to inspire love of God, but to enhance our love of doing a mitzvah or a mitzvot. Other Jewish symbols include Shabbat candles, Jewish stars, and the mezuzah. So the question I just want to raise for later discussion is, how do you feel about wearing Jewish symbols? How do you feel when you see other people wearing Jewish symbols? And what is comfortable for each of us? So I just want to sort of put those questions out there before we start doing the reading. Are there any other comments before we start?
Is that, excuse me.
Marcia, yeah.
I'm raising my hand. So do you want us to wait to comment about this, or what do you want us?
Yeah, let's start some of the reading and then pick up the questions. And I have a few other questions too. But I thought that's sort of a worthwhile issue to bring up as part of our discussion. But I think we should begin with at least some of the reading. I think once we get into how we feel about it, and how we feel about others wearing it or wearing it ourselves, could take up all of the time. So I want to at least do part of the reading. So who would like to start? It starts on page 42, Perek Bet, meaning of wearing tzitzit. You have a reader?
I'll read.
Okay, I'll read.
Evelyn's going to
Marcia.
Okay, we've got it. Okay, Marcia, and then next Evelyn will read too. And I think Donna had a hand up too. So maybe Donna, you might, oh, no, you didn't. Okay, so we have Marcia starting and then Evelyn reading. And I see Minya's hand is up too. You want to do some? Okay, so we'll start Marcia, Evelyn, Minya doing reading.
The Torah tradition concerns itself with nearly every aspect of human existence, including clothing. For example, it forbids men from dressing as men, men from dressing as women, and either from wearing sha'at nes, a garment made of mixture of wool and linen in Deuteronomy. Of particular importance is the commandment on wearing tzitzit or fringes. It is not only found in our Torah portion, but also in Deuteronomy. Moses instructs the Israelites to wear tzitzit on the corners of their garments throughout the generations. Each fringe is to include a petal techelet, or blue thread. As for the purpose of the tzitzit, Moses tells the people, look at it, the fringe, and recall all the commandments of God and observe them so that you do not follow your heart and eyes and your lustful urge. Thus you shall be reminded to observe all my commandments and to be holy to your God. I, Adonai, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I, Adonai, your God. Numbers. Throughout the centuries, Jewish men have been placing tzitzit on the four corners of a garment known as a talit katan, a small prayer shawl, worn either over or under a shirt and upon the four corners of the talit worn at prayer. The mitzvah is to wear tzitzit is considered so important by the rabbis who composed the first prayers of the synagogue that they included it as one of the 4 paragraphs recited each morning and evening after the Shema, the declaration of God's unity. The petel techelet, however, did cause problems. Apparently, the blue dye from which it was made either became impossible to acquire or the secret of its manufacture was lost. Some scholars speculate that it was made from the blood of a rare mollusk called kilazan, living off the coast of the land of Israel. When the mollusk could no longer be found, the rabbis did not abandon the making and wearing of tzitzit. Instead, they deliberately overlooked the prescription of Torah and decreed that the fringe could be made without the petel techelet. Clearly, they believed that wearing tzitzit, even without the petel techelet, was of great significance. As a matter of fact, both Rabbi Simeon ben Yochai and Rabbi Meir teach that carefully fulfilling the mitzvah of wearing tzitzit guarantees seeing the face of God. Others claim that the mitzvah of wearing tzitzit is equal in importance to all of the commandments. It's also in Jerusalem Talmud. Okay. What prompts such an evaluation? Why does Jewish tradition attach such importance to wearing tzitzit? Commenting on the word tzitzit, Rashi notes that its numerical value is 600. Sadai 90, Yad 10, Sadai 90, Yad 10, Tav 400. And that the fringe is tied with 8 threads and 5 knots. Together, the full numerical equivalent comes to 613, which is the number of commandments Rabbi Simlai in the 4th century found in the Torah. Later, Jewish tradition refers to these 613 commandments by the acronym TARYAG mitzvot, and then it goes through the numbers. Together, they total 613 and are understood to be divided between 165 positive commandments and 365 negative commandments. Rashi maintains that wearing the tzitzit and looking upon it, the fringe, remind one of the obligation to fulfill all 613 commandments of the Torah. Rashi's observation is drawn from a view expressed by earlier rabbinic commentators. They hold that when the Jews look upon the tzitzit, they are reminded of the commandments, and looking leads to remembering them, and remembering them leads to doing them. Since the performance of every mitzvah is important, the tzitzit function as a powerful symbol stimulating Jewish behavior. When worn and seen, they are a sign pointing to the carrying out of the commandments. In
You
some
want to pause?
communities,
Marcia, you want to pause there?
sure.
Any comments?
Yeah, I have a few. Let's see, the comment about wearing the tzitzit so that their lustful urges are diminished. We intimate that the Jewish men were highly oversexed. I mean, There seems to be that preoccupation of associating the two, which I find slightly amusing, to say the least. Also, the comment of not wearing a garment made of mixture of wool and linen. This is like mixing meat and dairy, milchiks and fleischiks. It's the same element that you are not to mix the two. And so they're carrying it to even not only dietary requirements, but also clothing requirements as well. And as far as the blue dye is concerned, that came from a specific mollusk that was prevalent in the Mediterranean. And during the days of the temple, the mollusks were harvested, and the garments of the priests at the temple wore these garments that were dyed blue. And of course, it could be blue or purple, depending upon the acidity of the solution that it was dyed in. It was either more alkaline or more acidic. And this is where the expression royal purple comes from, because when it achieved a certain pH, as they say, it meant that the shade was closely more purple than blue as such. And in Rome, the royal purple was quite prevalent. And so, but it was a messy procedure getting the dye from the mollusks, and you really had to extract thousands and thousands of them, and it was an industry unto itself. And that in itself is an interesting study to be made. And let's see, there was one more thing that I wanted to comment on. Yes, the fact that there were 165 positive commandments and 365 negative commandments. So there was more emphasis on what you may not do rather than emphasis on what you should be doing. And to me, this seems a rather perverse way of coaxing people to obey the 613 commandments. So anyhow, I said my piece. Somebody else can say something too.
Thank you so much, Evelyn. Did I say, Steve, you have your hand up?
Yes, ma'am. Quick question. I mean, as far as this mollusk, that wouldn't be considered kosher, would it?
No,
Is-
it would not be kosher to be eaten. Mollusks would be considered treif. They wouldn't,
Right.
because they were,
But how were they able to use the blood?
it was not blood. It was a different organ, because the mollusks did not have blood per se. There was a gland in the mollusks. It's a clam, basically.
Right.
And so, but there was one part of that particular clam that had been discovered to create this particular dye. But it took thousands and thousands of them to extract them. You can imagine when you have them extracting this gland and leaving the rest of the clam to decay on the beaches, the stench must have been
I can imagine.
overpowering. Yes,
I can imagine. Okay, thank you.
you're welcome.
I know that in modern times, hi Lorraine, welcome.
Thank
I know
you.
that in modern times that that Orthodox Jews at least do use the blue coloring, and it comes from a specific insect. You have to be using the right insect, and I know the cost of these blue threads for the blue dye threads for the tzitzit are much more expensive than just white ones. I understand for many Jews, certainly the Reformed Jews, that requirement of using the blue color is gone. And I often notice when I've been in temple, you'll see some people with taluses with tzitzit on it, and I hardly ever see blue ones. They're almost always purely white. But if you look in an Orthodox temple, you'll still see the blue tzitzit. Marcia, you had your hand up?
Don't you see the blue? All it calls for is a blue thread in that.
That's right.
Well,
I don't know if you can see it on here. Yeah.
that's on that vest garment, but on a talus, it's usually just a blue thread down one side, isn't it? You
It's
guys should know better than us, because
I see two per section, per corner. two blue threads on these.
And do you have 5 knots over there?
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes.
Yeah, because that's what it meant.
And it looks like, what do you call it? The fancy work people used to do with string a lot.
Macrame, yeah.
It really looks like macrame. It's very, very carefully and beautifully done.
And do you notice that that blue has now become kind of aqua? Because blue dye always has a tendency to fade more than other colors.
Uh-huh.
So that's kind of paled out. You know, can I make a comment?
Sure, Marcia.
When I went down to the Desert Botanical Gardens or whatever it's called here in Phoenix and did a class, it was sponsored out of Sun City Grant from the Adult Learning, whatever. And we made little drawings with dyes taken from plants. And there is an indigo colored dye. I don't know what plant it is. Is it called indigo? Where the
Yeah.
blue comes from that. And that actually was highly valued too. It seemed that blue seems to be really across different cultures. It seems to be a color that's valued.
Yeah, it's a rare color in nature, which is why it was valued, because of its rarity.
Yeah, they were showing us the different plants, different colors, and there was one that's a black one that I made a little cocopelli thing out of, and it was actually from a plant where you got black out of it also.
Wow.
Mushing up bugs and things like that got it too. Sai has his hand up.
Sai?
I was wondering, to me, it seemed like a very complicated procedure for the rabbis who have put together to use to keep reminding the congregation about their obligation to the Torah. So, they were trying to have the Jews, quotation marks, remember who they are and who their God was. And apparently, this was a problem in itself. And so the sisters was another method of trying to remind them who they were. Seems to me, though, it was very, very complicated. And I'm just curious how this could have been written at one period of time, or was it written over hundreds and hundreds of years?
Any other comments?
We need the rabbi for that because we're not historians, so we don't know.
Right. I know that in reading through this chapter and from reading from other sources, that the meaning and the purpose of tzitzit has varied over time, or at least the stress of the meaning of what tzitzit represent for the individual and for the Jewish community. I saw another hand up. Was that? I'm not
That
sure.
was me again.
Hi, Marcia.
Next week, I have the leading the Torah class next week, and I think next week's going to tie in a little to this week, and it's a study of Korah and rebellions of chieftain rebellions, and it was in rebellion and in answer to what Sai is saying. It was people saying enough already. Part of it is, so it must have been a difficult thing for these people to try to be balancing and juggling all these various things that they couldn't do, as you turn around and you can't do this and you can't do the other, and it had to have been very restrictive.
Nan.
I just wanted to say you're probably doing this Parsha again next week, because this Parsha, Shalech Lecha, is actually next week's Parsha, because mine Friday night is not this.
Well,
It's
I have
for
one
who?
next week, and it's Korah.
I understand, but it's in the if you go to the websites with the Torah portion, mine is called Barech Lecha, and it talks about how the Israelites, while they're in the desert, they're tired of eating manna and they want meat and other things. So I'm just letting you know, if you come to services or watch it on YouTube, this title will not be it, and it'll be a little different theme, but I wanted to clarify it because I got a little confused, and I confused Baruch when I said to him, it's going to be Shalech, because I had the right commentary, I had everything right, but the title was wrong. And Baruch goes, that's not what I'm seeing. We're confused. And I said, well, I got this from reformjudaism.org. And I was off, and it was when I went back to Rabbi's menu that I had it. So I'm just clarifying it for Friday.
Okay.
Thank you, Nan. Well, it's helpful we know up front. Any other comments? Yeah, Bernie. Bernie, you're muted.
He's still muted.
Bernie, you're still muted. Bernie,
Bernie.
You
you're
have to
still-
unmute.
Can't hear you.
There we go. Yay.
Yeah, good, thank you.
As I sit here and listen to all this and read what we're reading, it occurs to me that the Israelites were not a homogeneous group. They came from different backgrounds. They weren't all the Jews who left Egypt. And I wonder if all of these rules and regulations were to try to get them to all think the same and behave the same.
Yes.
A good point. And Marcia?
I think that's exactly what you're saying is true. I think Moses is trying to make a cohesive group out of them. And he has to keep drumming it in and drumming it in. However, he keeps adding a new commandment here and a new commandment there. And it gets to be, I think, a little difficult for people after a while, to say it mildly. But yeah, that was it. They're coming from all different kinds of backgrounds, and they're very disparate, and they got to make them into one.
Yeah, it sounds like what we're saying is that this is one strategy for trying to control behavior of this evolving community.
What do you think of this as a managerial? No, really. I mean, that's what it is. It's trying to create a certain, function. Like if you were in a business and you wanted everybody working at to the same end,
That's Evelyn.
Well, isn't that what religion is? You are trying to get a large group of people to conform to the same rules. And so in order to do that, you have to set down certain rules. When you stop and think of our religion, Catholicism, where they were full of rules as such, but it became so uniform that somebody who was Catholic, or for that matter, anyone who was Jewish, who was Orthodox, from America could go to Spain, could go to Italy, and go into a shul, and it would be the identical Hebrew service or Catholic Mass. And in order to have such conformity, you had to have a requirement of a specific set of rules. And the rules would have to be many, so that it would encompass populaces from all over the world, in effect. So I think, yes, making rules is part of religion. It's part of business. We have to live by rules. Otherwise, there is anarchy. And so the rules this is one of the things that children have to be taught at a very early age. They have to learn the rules. When they go to school, they can't misbehave and climb off the chandeliers, as it were. They have to sit and learn and behave according to the rules of that particular school. This is something that has to be drubbed in from an early age. And I think perhaps this is part of the problem of today's youth, where this requirement of conformity is somewhat lacking, because again, by the time they get to high school and they're unruly and beating up their teachers and so forth and so on, obviously this type of discipline has not been instilled in them. And again, we're getting back to rules. Yes, in order to make this group of they weren't really, would you call them Hebrews at this point in the early stages? They were not considered Jews at that point. I guess, were they considered Hebrews as such? Or were they such disparate groups of people? The religion itself was just being coalesced, in effect. It had not really been codified. And so, well, the rabbis came much later. So the rabbis were obviously trying to codify something that maybe had begun to fall apart. And so that's why they were creating these rules. But again, I have a feeling this was done over many, many years as such. Anyone disagree with me?
Thank you. Anybody have a different view? Okay, we're on the middle of page 43, left-hand side. It starts with "in some communities," and we have a second reader maybe now. Evelyn?
Yeah, okay. In some communities, Jews, while putting on the talit with its fringes, recite the following mystical prayer, capturing the symbolic meaning of the tzitzit. For the purpose of unifying God's name and in name of all Israel, I wrap myself in this talit and tzitzit. So let my soul and my 248 limbs and 365 veins, which is 613, be wrapped in the light of the tzitzit. Through the fulfillment of this commandment, may my soul, spirit, holy spark, and prayer be saved from all distractions. And may the doing of this commandment be considered by God as important and fulfilling as all of the particulars, details, and intentions of the 613 commandments that depend on it. Is this the prayer that also men recite that say, thank God I was not made a woman?
Bernie says no.
I'm just curious. Okay. Noting that the Torah commandment for wearing tzitzit includes the instructions to look at it, the fringe, so that you do not follow your heart and eyes in your lustful urge. The rabbis comment that the meaning of the tzitzit is more than a symbolic reminder to observe the commandments. Its functions, as well as to preserve ethical and particularly sexual purity. The heart and eyes tend to mislead the body. Our senses require direction and discipline, say the rabbis. That is the purpose of the tzitzit. They save those who wear them from evil temptations.
Why don't we pause here for just a moment? Anybody would like to comment? Yeah, Minya. And Minya, you're muted.
From the beginning, when I read this, I got the impression that, as Evelyn said earlier, that men are just so lustful that they have to have daily reminders that they have to refocus what they're thinking. And I had a problem with that because it really makes it sound like they can't be trusted. I don't know if that's the right word. They need to be reminded that what they're doing should be based on the commandments and not whatever lustful thought. Even though I know Jimmy Carter said that years ago, he had lust in his heart. I can't imagine that men are so weak that they all have lust in their minds all the time. So I have a problem with that statement.
Anybody else? Pam, and you're muted.
My thought process has been in this whole thing is that, you know, like a baseball team, they have a uniform so people can recognize that they're there. I mean, and to me, the whole tzitzit was for the Jews to so they remind themselves that they're Jewish. They're not other people. They're Jewish and they wear this. And I think that's true to this day. That reminder of the tribe you're in.
Marcia?
I just thinking, I think it's only recently that women were allowed to wear taluses and,
Yeah,
right?
and then
so-
reform, yeah.
Yeah, and reform, oh, yeah. And also considering well, I guess women didn't count back then. Let's get to that part.
Yeah.
Because they were not under a lot of the restrictions that the men were under. And only, I think, to the point that it was not because they were less lustful, but probably because what they were doing didn't matter as much. I think that's what you have to look at. I think it was what men did mattered. Bernie's going to argue with me.
Okay, Bernie?
Not really argue with you, but the Orthodox would argue with you and say that women are not unequal to men, they just have different roles.
And so their roles did not include prayer?
Oh, they weren't prohibited from praying, they just didn't get to wear the tefillin or the talit or go
What
up
would
to the
be the
bima
reasoning
or
for
all
that?
those other
Why?
neat things.
Is that not in the order of things that
I mean,
do that?
I don't want to be flippant about this, but to be pregnant and barefoot.
Yeah. It's the
make
order of respect in that society.
Okay, we have another gentleman side commenting.
I get a big kick out of this because to me, the whole thing is very, very political, very political. And Marsha just mentioned the fact that reform are allowed to wear, reform women are allowed to wear tallit. Well, who made that rule? Who decided that? And this is what bothers me. These decisions come down and we don't know who did it, who decided it. There was never any vote. Nobody consulted with me. And this is the thing that really bothers me about the Torah and so forth, that they're telling us, someone is telling us what we have to do all the time. And we never had any considerations in terms of our input in this kind of a thing. What do we do about that? Do we just keep accepting it?
We have two more hands up, Steve and then Bernie.
Okay.
I want Bernie to tell me.
First of all, I think it's probably a committee, maybe involving religious practices, rabbi, the cantor, all these individuals who set the rules, at least in our congregation, whether they should wear a talit or not is up to them. But I'm thinking that that's where the rules will probably started. I'm not sure how far back that dates, but I'm thinking that's probably where it's
Recent.
coming from.
Fairly recent.
And then Bernie?
I think the reform doesn't tell you what you should do or shouldn't do. It says make up your own mind. You're not prohibited from doing it.
One of the things that I read, reading background information, was that women didn't need to wear tzitzit and talit. Another comment is that certainly there were restrictions on modesty related to women. Certainly in modern day, and I don't know to what extent this was true in ancient times or earlier times, but in modern times, Orthodox women have to have their collarbones hidden. Clothes have to be below the elbow. Everything about their clothes should be modest. I don't think their toes are allowed to be shown. And they wear long skirts. So I think there are a number of limitations. You were pointing something out. Oh, and sure, a wig.
Yes, the head covering.
The head had to be covering so that one couldn't see their real sexy hair.
Right.
So I think there were quite a few limitations on women also. They're just different ones. Any further comments? Oh, Marcia.
But all those limitations are to prevent these lustful men from lusting after these women who are showing their toes or whatever.
Any further comments on male and female behavior? Okay, we're ready to read on and let's pick up.
We got more comments.
Bernie
One more
has his
comment.
hand up.
Where was that? Oh,
One
Bernie.
quickie. And we've left out the praying together or not praying together. Women
Right.
seating separately. It was explained to me that that was again this because of lustful thoughts, if you will.
Right.
And by the way, we toured a mosque in Egypt, and they explained that's the same reason that men are in the front and women are in the back.
Yeah. The Mechitza.
Well, yeah, and the Orthodox, yeah.
Any other comments? The difference between requirements for men and women? Okay, let's pick up the middle of page 43, left-hand side. And it says, it starts with, in some communities.
In,
Is our reader now?
yeah, we read that,
Oh, I'm sorry.
we read that. I think we're on the right hand.
Oh, you're right, you're right, you're right. Right
The
hand side,
seat, the
Right.
seat.
right at the end of the top partial paragraph. It starts with the tzitzit, as
Yeah.
you said, Evelyn. Okay, thank you.
The tzitzit, however, do not have magical powers. Pinchas Peli explains that the tzitzit are not a talisman, an amulet to guard the person who wears them from demons and evil spirits. Instead, the fringes represent the inner conscience of the religious person. Peli tells the Talmudic story of the man who once hired a prostitute. She prepared a tempting room with 7 beautiful beds in it. Lying naked on the bed, she invited him to join her. As he took off his clothing, his tzitzit struck him in the face and he fell to the floor. When she inquired what was wrong, he told her that in seeing the tzitzit, he had been reminded of his ethical duty. They testify that I am doing something wrong, he told her. Upon seeing how his faith functioned in his life, the woman decided to study and become a convert to Judaism. And if you believe that, then you can sell me a bridge in Brooklyn.
Okay, no one seems very convinced by this story. Do you want to continue? People comments?
Okay. People, comments Peli, are absent-minded, careless, forgetful of their obligations, and easily tempted into dangerous behavior. They often follow their eyes and hearts without calculating the consequences of what they are doing to themselves and others. The commandment to wear fringes is given to counter such tendencies, to alert us to our ethical and religious obligations. In his discussion of the tzitzit, Professor Yeshaya U. Leibowitz, brother of Torah commentator Nahama Leibowitz, draws a distinction between ethical and religious obligations. In an ethical decision, Leibowitz argues, a person relates to another as a human being and relates to treating that person as a human being with no criteria other than it feels right or wrong. One might say, I will do unto others as I would like them to do unto me. Or one might ask, if everyone did what I am about to do, would the world be a just, kind, and peaceful place? On the other hand, religious decisions, explains Leibowitz, place a person before God and require that one live in accordance with the commandments because that is what God demands. Rather than asking, does it feel right or wrong, or is this what I would want to do, others to do, the only question one asks is, what does God require of me? Tzitzit, concludes Leibowitz, reminds us not to go astray by following the whim of our heart or eyes. They are powerful reminders of a Jew's religious obligations to God.
And let's pause right there. Any comments? Pam?
I'm just amazed this thought process that Jewish men need all these little reminders to be good. It just,
That's what I said.
it doesn't speak well.
Yeah. Or maybe it was just the rabbis who put down these rules that were the ones that had sex on the brain.
So the purpose of the tzitzit are to remind us to behave a certain way, according to this.
Well, wouldn't you say that ethics and obedience to God are both are required? They're both part of the overall picture. You can't separate one from the other. It's not only man's behavior towards man himself, but his behavior or interaction with God in a sense. So they're related to each other. They're not identical, and yet they are part of the same overall picture as such. So to separate one from the other seems not logical.
Any other comments? Pam, I know Nan. Nan, you're muted. Yeah, you got it.
Yeah. Okay, that's the thing. You know, I find this interesting that the men use the tzitzit as a reminder to have a certain behavior. And I was thinking, you know, women or anybody can do the same thing if you wear a mezuzah around your neck or a Jewish Star of David, you know, or a hamsa. Any of these religious symbols that are expressions of your faith can be taken as reminders for certain behaviors. And, you know, while the tzitzit have more procedures and they seem to have more meaning behind them, but anyone could choose to use any of the religious symbols as a reminder of doing the behavior that the Bible or the Torah teaches us to do.
Thank you.
Hmm.
Any other comments?
Wait, well, I got a comment.
Oh, here's Bernie. Yep.
There it goes. Just to inject a little humor into this thing. Many, many years ago, when Harriet was teaching first grade, one of her students was wearing a chai. And she asked her, "Do you know what that means?" And the little girl said, "Yeah, 24 karat gold." So just wearing a mezuzah or a chai or whatever, it doesn't necessarily mean that it means anything to you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts? Sai.
You know, it's interesting that we have so many reminders. What about the mezuzah? We have that. We have fringes. We have other sorts of reminders. We're constantly being reminded that we are Jewish. And is that a concern? Is the feeling that we're really not sure we need these reminders? It's kind of an interesting thing. And then somebody mentioned something which I thought was interesting. Do we have a relationship to God or an obligation to God?
That's an interesting question.
Both.
That's the question. Do we have a relationship to God or an obligation to God?
Well, what do you mean? How do you define relationship?
Well, the fact that you decided that you wanted to have a God, and you wanted to pray for him on Tuesdays and Thursdays, or whatever it is this relationship was that you had with him, and you decided what the relationship. You could talk to him the way you wanted to. If you didn't want to, you didn't, so forth. Versus an obligation which demands certain things from you.
Marcia?
That's confusing what you said right there, because the relationship is how you feel about what God expects of you and such, but you could use those two words, relationship and obligation. Whatever you said, you could use it as that, or you could say obligation and say relationship, and you're meaning the same thing in what you're saying. What would be your definition of an obligation to God?
These things we're talking about.
All the
When he
rules and
expects
regs.
you to do things, and you're expected to do things. And
And
you're
your relationship
guilty,
is
you're
your
supposed
feeling.
to feel guilty if you don't do them.
And what is your relationship then?
Well, the relationship is you can pick and choose. You have you don't have to do them. It's not required of you if you're not inclined to do them. You don't have to go to temple on Saturday versus the obligation where you have to go to temple on Saturday, as an example.
In the next paragraph, it picks up the question of obligation some more. Evelyn, do you want to continue reading, or we could have Minya read?
Have Minya read for a change.
Okay, you're up, Minya.
I was going to say Evelyn was doing such a good job if she wanted to continue.
If you want me to,
I'm
I
not being
will.
sarcastic, I really mean it. Leibowitz's view that the tzitzit remind the people of Israel's obligation to God agrees with an early rabbinic observation that the fringes are an insignia of the people's liberation and relationship to God. Before the Exodus, say the rabbis, the people were forced to wear badges of slavery, emblems indicating that they were the property of Pharaoh. The badges were a form of humiliation, like the yellow star forced upon Jews by the Nazis. They identified the people as objects of scorn and targets for hatred and brutality. Once liberated, the people are commanded to wear tzitzit. The fringes are a badge of freedom. They symbolize the liberation of the Jews. Jews will never again be slaves to other human beings and will serve only God.
Let's pause right there. Would some people like to comment on that last paragraph, 2 paragraphs that we just covered? Yeah, Minya.
It
And then
seems that
Evelyn.
throughout the generations, Jews have had to wear something all the time to mark themselves apart from everybody else. So here we are today in modern times, willing to wear jewelry that is of a religious persuasion. I don't know what word to use. But why is it? It just goes with, I guess, anti-Semitism forever, that we've always had to wear something that would separate us from everybody else. Heaven forbid they didn't know that we were a Jew. What could we possibly do to them?
Yeah, this is a new issue that's brought up here. I think that again, it's very, very interesting. It's not just what the symbol or religious object means to us, but means to others seeing us.
Yeah.
Yeah, Marcia?
Well, the Christians will wear crosses, so you can't say that we're the only ones who wear our religious symbols.
No, they all.
And they wear them, and they're very elaborate and fancy, and it shows. Sometimes it's, as with the Jews, it's a show of wealth. How fancy and how elaborate is your Star of David, and so I figure that I think it. In this society now, and you asked this question up front, Reva, I feel uncomfortable wearing my Magen David when I walk around on the streets in surprise, when I see that Confederate flag flying on the pickup truck down the street, And so if I go to temple, I feel comfortable wearing it because I'm amongst my own.
Yeah, that's precisely.
And yours, Evelyn said, look.
Yeah, I agree with you. Right now, my feelings are with society being hostile to the Jews in general, the anti-Semitism problem, walking around exhibiting the fact that you are, I think, leaves you vulnerable to possible physical or verbal attack in one way or another. I think wearing these symbols depends upon the environment. Is it a welcoming environment? Yes, it is when we go to shul. and we go to services, we're among our own. However, if we're out in society and there is the general feeling that if we were to broadcast that we ourselves were Jews, as it has been shown where the men wear a kippah and wear tzitzis out in the street, in certain cities, there have been attacks on these men. And so broadcasting the fact that you're Jewish right now makes me feel the way it was in Germany back at that time. Don't show. I mean, the feeling is you're asking for trouble if you do. And my feelings at the moment are, no, I don't feel comfortable wearing any symbol of Judaism unless I am going to temple. It's my own
Thank you.
personal feeling.
Thank you. I've got two hands up, Pam and then Minya.
Well, the anti-Semites think that the Jews have to be marked. I mean, their house has to be marked. They should be wearing something. And it's part of that thing where they, and I can't figure out why, but they feel the need to say that these people, you know, live in this house or do this, the anti-Semites. They feel that we need to be, and the same thing with the Nazis did, where they, you know, they all had to wear their,
Yeah.
you know, thing. And
Yellow armband.
I've never understood that, why why there are certain people who feel that we have to be marked or our houses have to be marked.
Yeah, and then I think it was Minya.
Yes, we had some work done at our house where we had stones put in the front. And somehow, I guess, maybe they saw a mezuzah on the door, whatever it was, they finished the job. And then they left all the remains, the garbage from the bags and the cement and whatever. They left it in a pile in front of the house. And we would call and say, are you coming to pick it up? Are you going to clean? Oh, absolutely. Don't worry. We're coming. 2 days passed, 3 days passed, 4 days passed. They never showed up. And we called them again because it's an eyesore. It was an eyesore. Turns out when they came back with their truck, not only did they have a Trump bumper sticker, but their attitude was such that we figured that the other half of it, or at least I did, had to be with the fact that they saw we were Jewish. So they left the crap in front as long as they possibly could. And it took almost 2 weeks for them to come and pick it up again, to pick it up. So don't ask me for a recommendation.
Okay.
Thank you, Minya.
We'll
And
ask you, so
Steve-
we don't use them. Okay.
Steve, you had your hand up? You might have just been gesturing. I'm not sure. I thought I saw your hand up. No? Any other comments?
No?
Okay, let's go on at the bottom of 44, starting with David Wolfson.
David
Left-hand side.
Wolfson, David Wolfson, an early Zionist leader, provides another meaning for tzitzit. When Theodore Herzl asked him to make the preparations for the first Zionist Congress in Basel, Switzerland in 1897, Wolfson saw colors and a flag that would unite delegates from all over the world. He was faced with the problem of choosing a flag to decorate the Congress Hall. Wolfson relates, then it flashed upon my mind. We do have a flag indeed. It's white and blue, the talit in which we wrap ourselves during prayer. This talit with its tzitzit is our coat of arms, our emblem. Let us take out the talit and unfurl it before the eyes of Israel, before the eyes of all nations. Today,
Let's pause there again. Are there any comments on that last paragraph? Or also the role of the flag and the role of the colors?
It was very meaningful, I think. Yeah.
And Steve?
Yes, well, at weddings, they use the talit as the kuppah. So yeah, that's a symbol as well. And I guess it kind of goes back to the fact that, you know, you need to honor the commandments and not be lustful to your mate until you are officially married and have these rules and regulations.
I think that's a very sweet reminder of the role of the talis with the with the tzitzis. I know in my family, my husband and I used his very large talis when we got married. And when one of his daughters was married, I sent the talis to her to use for her wedding. And it was meaningful for all of us that we carried on that tradition from one generation to the next.
Very nice.
Hmm.
Any other comments?
Hmm.
Okay, let's go to the next paragraph then.
Today,
Yeah,
to continue to be prized by Jews as a symbol of their historic covenant with God and as a badge of freedom and national existence. Looking at the fringes recalls ethical and ritual responsibilities. They are a reminder that the Jew, as a servant of God, must confront temptation and confusion between right and wrong behavior in light of what the 613 mitzvot of Jewish tradition demand. Tzitzit remain a proud badge of Jewish identity and commitment.
thank you. Any comments?
Yes, I do.
Sherminia,
When I see someone walking down the street and they have tzitzit on the outside, I think they're very brave because they're showing the world that they're Jewish. But we're not in that kind of safe environment anymore. So I really feel that when I do see that, I hope they understand that they're a target, that they're marking themselves as a target. I know I have a friend whose son lives in Germany, and he was very religious and had to wear a yarmulke until he started getting abused. He would be walking down the street and someone would like smack him or bump into him or whatever. And as soon as he stopped wearing his kippah, he had better experiences walking down the street.
Sad but true.
It's a mark.
yeah. Other comments?
Hmm.
I have some other sources of information that might be interesting. According to Rashi, that tzitzit are a useful reminder of the need for faith. When we see other people wearing them, we may be reminded of the need for faith, and we can strive to attain it in our own through the creation of new physical reminders. Now, I also looked up the URJ, which is is an organization of Reform Judaism. The website is reformjudaism.org. Tzitzit are tangible symbols along with the talit wrapped around us, can be like wrapping ourselves in something holy, creating a holy space for prayer. So again, they're incorporating both the talis and the tzitzit, which is sort of inconsistently referenced earlier. Also the talis with the tzitzit all serve at the communal level, can be seen as a big tent where there is enough room for all of us. So I thought we would at least address the question of, our feelings both about how do we feel about seeing other people wearing a talis? How do we feel about it possibly wearing it ourselves? And what sort of meaning does it have for us? So how do you feel when you see other people wearing a talis?
Are you talking in shul itself? Is that it?
Right. I think that, well, we see it at shul, and I guess where else do we see it? We see it at marriages. We see it at maybe funerals. I'm not sure.
Religious occasions, you're saying.
Yeah, religious occasions.
Yeah. Well, it is a symbol of our religion per se. When I first joined Temple Beth Shalom 39 years ago, it was really a reformed temple in every sense of the word. The entire service was English, except for the Shema and one or two other prayers. Everything else was in English. A kippah was not worn by anyone except the rabbi. A talit was not worn by anyone except Baruch or the rabbi. And so we were essentially civilians sitting in the shul. As the years went by, whether it was the URJ or whether our particular rabbi himself, gradually they began to incorporate much more Hebrew, and some of the men would wear a talit or certainly a kippah. The men who were more conservative but going to Temple Beth Shalom might wear a talit, but by and large, it's only in recent years that we're beginning to see men wearing a talit coming to services, and women as well. Women are now wearing a kippah or a head covering, which the conservative women have always worn a head covering of one sort. And so it's, you're getting Reform Judaism leaning more towards conservative, and I think conservative can't quite make up its mind. Some are going more orthodox and some are becoming more reform. I think it's a religion constantly in transitions, shall we say, and it's not cast in concrete. It depends on the individual congregations and within the framework of whether they are Reform, conservative, or Orthodox. And there's still a great variation.
Marcia, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I think it depends on the congregation. Even within this congregation, now I've been a member here for 18 years, right? And Rabbi Moss, first of all, he wore that, what do you call the
Vestments.
the robe, yeah, the
Robe.
prayer robe, and Kaplan does not, and that was his choice. And he and Rabbi Moss and the cantor both wore prayer robes, okay, and with a elaborate prayer shawl over it, okay. And that choice was made to change that when Rabbi Kaplan began. Also, over the years, I think it was our congregation, Evelyn, not across the board reform, that this congregation is kind of skewed a little bit more conservative in its dress, if not probably the only thing it skewed conservative on, but in dress. And maybe, I don't know what the reasoning for that is. I think maybe when you come into the congregation and people are wearing a tallis or a robe or something like that, it sets that time apart and makes it more special. You see that religiosity, even if it's for that 1.5 hours, it's special. And I think that makes a difference, in your mindset when you go in and you sit down and you start to pray. It brings a calm about you. You're in a special place, wearing special clothes, if you will.
Yes, yeah. May I make a comment on what you said? When we had COVID and were forced to go to Zoom, and we could see everybody who was watching the service, what disturbed me was that people were dressed in pajamas or in an outfit more suited for the beach, were sitting and eating their dinner during the service. And I found that literally repugnant. I mean, this was a religious service. And if you want to participate, at least show. Up until recently, when we had the school, I found the young parents and the children coming dressed, as I said, as if they were going to the beach with flip-flops. The women were wearing shorts or skimpy tops. It was, to me, inappropriate dress. My feelings are, I'm old-fashioned, and when you go to temple, one should dress appropriately for the occasion. If you go to the beach, you dress one way. If you're going to a luncheon, it's another way. And if you're going to shul, at least wear clothing that is appropriate for the occasion. And unhappily, today's culture is such that anything goes. And again, to me, this is a degradation of values that we used to treasure and no longer do. At least the younger people do not. And it's a disturbing aspect of what is happening. And I honestly can't see that the culture today, whether it's in aspect of religion or just society as a whole, is benefiting in any way. If anything, I think behavior is leading to a more chaotic, licentious situation. And okay, so I'm old fashioned, sue me.
Evelyn, I overall agree with you a great deal with one exception. And that is when we were heavily into COVID, there were people who came on Zoom who were sick, who were, said, I've just come out of the hospital. I'm just barely.
I'm not talking about those people. I'm
Those are
talking
the
about,
those are the
Yeah.
exceptions I remember seeing, and I'm thinking to myself, even though they're sick, they're remaining a part of the community. But otherwise, I absolutely agree with you.
I mean, when we would see young families, the kids from the school sitting there and in their pajamas, eating, playing with their pets, it just was, it was just totally inappropriate. And so, okay, as I say, I felt it was objectionable.
Any other comments? Yes, Steve.
Well, and commenting on Evelyn's discussion, the fact that even getting people in their seats, actually in the sanctuary, whether you wear shorts or if you wear a suit and tie, I'm sure a number of people or leaders of the community are saying, okay, let's get the people in. It doesn't matter what they wear as long as they show up. A lot of people don't show up for services on Friday nights. I mean, how many of our congregation do not show up? I mean, to me, yes, I grew up dressed up, shirt, tie, coat, slacks, dress shoes, not tennis shoes. Those were the values that I was brought up with. But, in this day and time, you need people in those seats.
The bodies. Yeah.
That's important. Very, very important. I'm disagreeing with you, Evelyn. I agree with you in the fact that you should wear appropriate clothing within the temple, but that's my comment.
Nan, thank you.
I think this relates to religion in general, no matter what church or synagogue you belong to. I moved to Arizona in 1988, and I have to tell you that my first couple of Sundays, as I went about shopping or whatever, and I would pass churches, my mouth was agape at the people going into the services in shorts and sandals and very, very casual. And I'm thinking, oh my God, the culture is so different. I was living in Scottsdale at the time, and it didn't matter whether I was passing a church in Scottsdale or one in Phoenix. I didn't belong to a synagogue at that time, so I wasn't as familiar, going regularly to synagogue to see how they dressed. But once I started going to services, I questioned, because I most of the time, if I went to a synagogue, people were dressed respectively. But there was the comment made, we have such heat for such a long period of time that people need to be comfortable. So women carried a shawl, so that if the AC got too big, too cold, they could throw that on or whatever. And for most people, women kept their arms, at least their shoulders, covered, and they weren't wearing halters or crop tops, whatever. But I just think it was the relaxed climate and culture of Arizona and the heat that made it that way. And you still see it. I mean, you can go out on a Sunday, you pass any one of the churches, and especially the ones where they have families. Like if you go to a CCV church, which is all over, and they have large groups of members with families, the kids are wearing shorts and sandals and flip-flops. And, you know, that's just been my opinion. And that was 35 years ago. So I don't, you know, I see our congregation has become a little more lax. I remember when Rabbi Moss was rabbi and he was off for the summer, and we had those lay services in the small chapel. Those Friday evenings were very casual. People, the men all wore shorts. They had, most of them had shirts without a tie, you know, and, you know, sandals, whatever. But we were in a small the small area. It was a much shortened service because we had that small soft covered prayer book we used. And I think that's carried over now that Rabbi Kaplan is a full, a year-round rabbi where services are conducted inside the sanctuary 12 months out of the year. So just my observations.
Thank you, Nan. I saw your hand up. Sai?
Boy, you are all old people, very, very old people. I can remember when I went on an airplane in the 50s, everybody was dressed. If you went to the theater, but so what? So what? Everything is changing. We're all aware of it, and it's a good thing. It's a good thing it's all changing. I certainly wouldn't want my neighbors or my friends to act the way I acted back in 1950. That's not the way the world is. And we have to appreciate the fact that the young people do make changes. Otherwise, it would be a very, very boring existence.
Thank you. And oh, Donna, yes.
Yeah, just saying not just to going to services, but also in Israel at weddings. And weddings are formal. There's always the rabbi at the weddings. But the groom, as well as the other young people, they will be dressed with jeans on. Now they'll have a jacket on maybe with those jeans, but it is a jean society, which came the generation after my generation. So I never got into jeans, but it's very prevalent. And there's the groom, the bride in a beautiful dress, and the groom in his jeans and a jacket.
Thank you, Donna. I see Steve and then Pam.
Well, okay, Donna, just for an example, you're wearing a hair cover
I do.
and you're wearing that out of respect, correct?
There was a point in time in my life, and the Lord spoke to me, God spoke to me and told me he wanted me to cover my head when I was in services or in prayer. And it took me a while, quite a while to agree with him. But I did, and now I'm not comfortable going into a service without it on. And I consider this a service to me when on this teaching. And that's why I do.
Thank you, Donna.
It was just an observation because we're talking about symbols.
Right.
And, you know, we're seeing you with a hair cover, you know, and obviously it's showing respect to God, but also not only just to God, but to you.
Right. And as it has been said in the past here, that it helps me to remember where I am. You know, the mind of people, you can sit in a nice service and listen to a message and whatever, and your mind is off wandering I'm going to put a pot roast on when I go home or something like that. Or the children and I are going to do something after the service, or, you know, so it's a reminder of where I am.
Thank you. I've got a follow-up quote on this. According to the resource, My Jewish Learning Fringed with Faith, it's called, it may serve as a visual trigger a connection to our collective memory as Jews. Jewish symbols worn daily may be a much more effective and meaningful reminder system than, say, a note on our smartphones. So I wanted to just open the question, what sort of symbol do you sometimes wear or always wear that's meaningful to you?
Hmm,
Open that to everybody.
well, I have a piece of jewelry that has the Torah on, has the menorah on it, and I also have a piece of jewelry that is mezuzah, in the shape of mezuzah. And so when I put them on, I feel Jewish. And
You don't do it normally. You don't do it usually.
yeah.
Lorraine? You need to unmute.
Okay.
Got it.
When I was growing up, my parents were very cognizant of the fact that Jews were persecuted in Europe. They didn't want me to wear any symbol. I wanted to wear a Jewish star. I was so proud. My mother said, "You can be proud in our house in a temple, not in public school." So I followed them. When I was older, I couldn't wait to get a hamsa, and I never take it off. When Evelyn said she has a piece of jewelry that she puts on specifically, if I understood you correctly, for services or a special Jewish event, I never take mine off, including when I shower. It's the cleanest hamsa in town. I just love the fact that I can wear it, that I can be free, that I can let the world know what I am and who I am. And it's like when I got engaged, my mother told me on the subway, because I had to take the subway in New York to teach, to turn the diamond around to face my palm so that no one would beat me up for my ring. I never would have thought of it, but she did. I guess, it depends what your background is.
Yeah.
And, that was where she was coming from. I think we're so lucky in this country when we go down the street, for the most part, and I wouldn't say all over, but that we can be proud of who we are. I don't see all this anti-Semitism happening. And I student taught in Harlem, New York, and I taught in a mainly Hispanic Black community. I never had a fear. Maybe I'm naive, I don't know. And it just worked. Yeah.
Thank you.
You.
And Marcia, and then Pam.
I think, Lorraine, you grew up in New York.
Hmm.
I grew up in New York. I agree with you, but then I went to a high school where there were maybe a half a dozen non-Jewish kids. So on high holidays, they basically closed the school
Oh,
because,
yes, yes.
right?
Mine
And-
too.
Yes, but that was then and this is now. And
Yeah.
now is a different time, and I think putting that mezuzah on or whatever, Hansa, Star of David on the subway, it's not the same. And I would think twice about it. I don't think 1950s, 60s is going to be the same as in 2020.
No,
So
it's true.
we have to
I
rethink,
agree.
be careful.
Guy,
I'll tell you the story
and
that,
Pam.
my wife is a convert and she loves to hear anything about Jewish literature, Jewish religion, or Jewish music. But anyway, when we were traveling, which I don't do anymore, but when we were traveling, she always wore a Jewish star. And we made a lot of friends that way. I mean, you could be sitting in Italy, and if somebody came over and they saw your Jewish star and they were Jewish, you had friends right away. And this was very interesting because we met some very interesting people over the years.
I just want to mention, I wear a mezuzah. I bought it at our temple store. And I purposely got a longer chain for it so that if I'm in a Jewish environment, I'll wear it out. If I'm in a mixed environment, I tend to put it
Inside, yeah.
inside. Yeah, yeah. And I'm not even sure how many people would recognize a mezuzah as being a Jewish religious symbol.
Yeah.
Jews would spot it, but I think other people might not. Bernie?
I've been in my apartment here in Colorado for almost 2 years. I have a mezuzah on the outside door, and it's not invisible by any means. It's bright white, and you can't miss it when you walk by. Nobody has ever made a comment. Either asked me what it was or whatever.
Thank you.
Could be just disinterest on their part.
Yeah,
Just
that's
or-
better than interest in the wrong way.
Mm.
I once noticed a mezuzah on a neighbor's door, somebody I'd never spoken to. And yet, because I saw the mezuzah on the door, I felt somehow an additional connection to her. And I stopped and knocked at her door. I was just dropping something off and I said, hello, I live a couple doors down, wanted to let you know that I'm Jewish too. And, you know, my name is Riva, which is a very Jewish name for people who know those things. But I think, as Bernie described, somehow it's a very nice, or I guess Cy said, sometimes it's a very nice connection to other people.
I think again, it's time and circumstance that determine the differences. That's
Right,
all.
right. And
Yeah.
Pam,
Back when Dave worked at kind of as construction supervisor at Royal Oaks, which is across the street from the synagogue, the other
Yeah.
side. And they were putting new doors on, and one of the Jewish people said, you know, can we, you know, have a mezuzah on the door? And the company said, oh, no, we can't have anything on the door. And Dave went to the leaders of the Royal Oaks. He said, you don't understand. There will be a mezuzah on the new doors. And he says, it's not, you know, it's one of those things. It will happen. And they went, okay.
thank you, Pam.
Yeah,
And Dave-
because Royal Oaks is run by Presbyterians.
Yeah.
Any other
One
comments?
thing before I mute, one thing, you know, I think about, you know, we're there most Friday nights, you know, thanks to Yeshiva Boy. But anyway, why, how can we get more people in the seats? We don't have a lot of people on Zoom Friday nights. We don't have a lot of people in the synagogue. I mean, how do we get more people?
It's hard during the summer. You know, maybe the ice cream oneggs will be a draw. I'm inviting you all to come Friday night when I lead the service because I don't want to see an empty sanctuary. But you know, during the year, I think it depends. People have scheduled, you know, there are a lot of people traveling now. So the summer is going to be a challenge, but come the end of August or starting with Shlichot, I would like to see more. I think the John Green and the inreach group that he's putting together, I think that will help. And I don't know, when Dana gets back from his vacation, I know I'll be having some meetings with him as far as religious practices go. So I will be having some discussions with him and maybe we can brainstorm and come up. But I hope Bernie is tuning in occasionally on Friday nights to see services from Colorado. But you know, when I've been home, I've seen, I think the week I was home that I didn't come, and when I started, there were like 5 people on. I think at the most there were like 20, but I don't know who those 20 were. I don't know if these people are consistent people,
Yeah.
you know.
Man,
Yeah.
I watch because at this point in my life, it's easier for me to be home rather than drive at
Right.
night down to the temple. And I watch on YouTube. I can't tell you the number of times this past several months when I have not been either able to access the service or the service has had a problem with either sound or picture. And so there's an inconsistency to it. And the upshot is if this happens enough times, you kind of feel like giving up and saying, what the heck, why bother trying to tune in? I think something has to be done to make sure that it is on every single week. And so in that way, when I tune in, I know it's going to be there and not tune in and say, oh my God, am I going to get a picture? Am I going to get a sound or what have you? There are problems, I'm sure, but at this point, it's very disheartening to be able to not to be able to.
Yeah,
tune in.
it is.
They have
Yeah.
upgraded the equipment though, so I think over the past couple of weeks, it's getting better. And I don't know who's going to be in the booth Friday night, but you know, maybe we can have them check on sound quality prior to the service beginning.
It's also sometimes the picture that doesn't, you get a black, picture. So,
Well,
Any other final thoughts on sit, Jewish symbols and whatever else?
good job.
Very
Nice
good.
job, Reva. Thank you.
Thank you, Reva.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks
Can
to
I ask,
everybody.
but before
Thanks to
we
everybody. Thank you.
leave,
Thank you
can
for
I ask?
everybody participating. It's wonderful. We've had a really good turnout today. I'll turn it over to Steve to.
Okay, well, Marcia has her hand.
I have next week, and can I ask you the favor of reading the beginning, the Targum, which explains the story of Korah, so that when we get into it, we're a little bit ahead of the game, that we know what we're talking about and don't have to absorb it right there at the beginning of class. Okay, so I would appreciate that. It's a bit of a complicated story, and really, I'm going to stay up front. There are two stories and they happened at separate times, but the Torah puts them together. I was so confused over doing this one particular thing. I bothered the rabbi. He gave me the name of David, what was his name? It wasn't Kaplan. He gave me the name of somebody who was our a resident scholar at our congregation, and his doctorate was on Korah. So he contacted me, got all these people feeding me all this, usually the same information, but I would appreciate if you could just read the story of Korah before class. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Marcia.
Okay,
Back to you,
let's
Steve.
conclude with the blessing. Then I have a couple comments as well afterwards. So let us begin together. Baruch atah
Adonai.
Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan Torah emet
Torment.
t'chai olam natan b'tokenu. Baruch
Baruch atah
atah
Adonai.
noten Torah.
Torah.
Blessed is Adonai our God, ruler of the universe, who has given us a teaching of truth, implanted within us eternal life. Blessed is Adonai, giver of the Torah. Next week, Marcia, like you mentioned earlier, you're going to be leading, and then myself is the next week, and then Evelyn, you're doing
On the 28th.
28th, and then Pam, you're doing the Pam, you're doing the 5th of July, and then Minya, you're doing the 12th of July. Is that correct? Okay. If you have any comments or needing help with any of these portions, let us know, and I'm sure we can work it out in that regard. So that's all I have. Have a great rest of the week. And if anyone else has any comments, please either email me or text me one way or the other. Okay?
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Everybody.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Great discussion. Reva, you did great.
Yeah. Reva, you set the bar high for us. who
Yeah,
have to
perfect
follow.
group is a great
Yeah.
size.
Thanks.
Thank you, Reva.
you.
Yes.
You're welcome. You're welcome, everybody.
Oh, that Rabbi Frankel. Yes, that's it. Yes.
Yeah.
Send it. Yes, thank you. That
All
was.
righty. I'm stopping.
Okay, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay.